Gonna have a chance to turn two. They got him.
Carrying track, wall, and it's gone. Throwing to the end zone, tipped, picked off.
Look, they shoot and score on the header.
Welcome back for episode 5 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Today marks about a month that I've been bringing you White Noise Sports. If you could continue to spread the word, share the links to the episodes, leave a rating on Spotify, that would all be greatly appreciated. Last week, I gave you my NBA playoff preview, and I'll be the first one to admit that I boofed the play-in predictions pretty hard. We're going to get to a full recap from the play-in at the end of this episode, so be patient. I'll reset the whole playoff field and make predictions for the second round next week. As I'm recording, the NFL Draft is the biggest news in the sports world today, and after it wraps up this weekend, I'm going to drop a special midweek episode going over the picks from my first round mock draft. NBA and NFL talk coming soon, but a little different topic for today. The not-so-pleasant issue on tap off the jump is the rash of injuries to prominent starting pitchers in the major leagues. My disclaimer is I am no major league pitcher by any means, and I'm not big on the blame game. I'm going to try and zoom out on the issue and synthesize from the popular theories. I'll start off with the obvious, that you can't nail down just one cause. The list of top starting pitchers currently dealing with arm and or shoulder injuries who are on the injured list reads like this: Eduardo Rodriguez of the Diamondbacks, Garrett Cole of the Yankees, Spencer Strider of the Braves, Lucas Giolito of the Red Sox, Shane Bieber of the Guardians, Tony Gonsolin and Clayton Kershaw of the Dodgers, Robbie Ray of the Giants, and Jacob deGrom of the Rangers. Every one of these guys is an ace or close to it or have been an ace before. Even Justin Verlander just came back last Friday. He had a lengthy shoulder rehab and has had Tommy John as well. These are only the most prominent guys I could find currently on the MLB injury report. Of course, that's going to change almost daily. Now to dive into all the theories behind the injuries. Tons of people are looking to blame the pitch clock. Professional baseball has been played for something like 170 years, and only since 2023 have the rules ever mandated such a quick pace of play. The density of the action in a baseball game and the total average game time are down, though not as much as you might think. I feel that on a practical level, it's hard to imagine the tiny quantity of extra quote-unquote recovery that pitchers are missing between pitches, explaining much of the injury problem. MLB claims to have seen a Johns Hopkins study showing no correlation as well, but to my knowledge that isn't public. It's almost like every pro league is a corporation and has the same kind of incentive to cover up the unsavory truths. Another big culprit in the media's sort of prison lineup today is velocity. The theory's stupid simple. Guys try to throw harder than they're meant to. Their muscles, and more importantly, ligaments and tendons, have to adapt to each sort of velocity level before they can throw harder. Rather, they can throw as hard as they want, but they'll quickly exceed the adaptive capacity of the ligaments and tendons. Therefore, they're chronically under-recovered. The first thing I'll say about chasing velocity is that there's obviously a strong correlation. The arm injury and specifically Tommy John rates are at an all-time high, as more pitchers had Tommy John surgery in 2023 than the entire decade of the 1990s. There are also plenty more fireballers and guys who are trying to empty the tank throwing 100 plus. Now here I inject my own theory a little bit. It sounds similar to the pure velocity problem, but one of the culprits I'd blame the most is that there's no such thing as a get-me-over fastball anymore. I'm going to define a get-me-over fastball as typically used on the first pitch or a 2-0 or 3-0 count. It's not thrown with max effort, you might take a few miles an hour off, and it tends to be a bit closer to the middle of the plate. Obviously, you can't throw too many fastballs like that without getting crushed, so it's best used when you expect the batter to take. I think back to Justin Verlander's Tigers days. He's been able to throw 100 to 102 since 2005, though granted not completely injury-free like we mentioned. The difference between Verlander then and everyone now is that the top end of that range was reserved only for late innings and or runners-on situations. It wasn't uncommon to see him sit at 94 to 95 in the first inning, then modulate that effort only when it got necessary. Nowadays, even starters throw with max effort earlier and more often, causing them to throw fewer innings, and I have to imagine also increasing the injury risk in any one start. So that's as much as I'm going to say about arm injuries to starting pitchers as of now. If any formal data does come out about it, or if more prominent guys keep going down, I'll probably throw it in an episode down the line. Next segment is a couple of unwritten rules. I could geek about these for days, and I might even make this a recurring segment on the show. I've seen some trends in games I've watched in the last couple of years that blow my mind a little bit, and I want to start with one that's really fresh because I just watched it recently. I figured I'll give you the Wikipedia definition of an unwritten rule, and then we can dive into a few specific examples. An unwritten rule is a behavioral constraint that is not typically written down or voiced. Unwritten rules are often part of an organization's history, values, and norms, and are understood and accepted by everyone, although they may not have been formally established. MLB changed the rules on position players pitching last year after they made 132 appearances in 2022. That was the most on record. The team holding the lead has to be up by 10 runs or more in the 9th inning in order to pitch a position player. The rules are a bit nicer to losing teams, who can let their players pitch anytime they're down 8 runs or more, plus anything is fair game in extra innings. Yes, you're unintentionally getting even more Tigers talk here, deal with it. So the most recent example I saw was off of the Tigers' Zach McKinstry back on April 13th. I'll quickly set the scene. They're in the 12th inning in a game against the Twins. It's the first game of a doubleheader. McKinstry himself had made a 3-run error earlier in the inning at third base. Then he was called on to pitch. He threw between 50 and a blistering 68 miles an hour, and Matt Wallner hit a 3-run bomb off his quote-unquote slider, with the Twins already up 8-4. The Tigers score 1 run in the bottom of the inning to finish off your average, everyday 11-5, 12-inning game. Other important context to consider, it's a division game between the Tigers and Twins. There's also the extra inning runner on second base, meaning that the Tigers would have had some chance of coming back if that game stayed at 4 runs. Consider that stat I mentioned in my awards predictions where I said that they were scoring almost 50% of their runs in the 8th inning or later. There was also a mound visit debacle. A.J. Hinch was headed out there and thought that he had one more mound visit left when he didn't. That meant that he had to remove the pitcher on the mound, Alex Lang at the time, meaning McKinstry drew the short straw there and had to come in with no prior warning. It was a disaster of a sequence all around, even more so when considering that was only the first game of the doubleheader. Part of the reason that McKinstry had to come in as well was just to save the bullpen for that second game. Now McKinstry, at least while he was pitching, didn't give up the first 4 runs that scored in that 12th inning, but still, it seems it's more acceptable than ever to crush position players. Do I think you look overly cool? No, but you do what you gotta do. From everything I can find, position players in these situations fare worse now than in any other era, excluding former pitchers and/or two-way players like Shohei Ohtani. In part, it comes down to just how good the average major leaguer is at their job. Yogi Berra was a hardware salesman. Ted Williams famously sacrificed his prime serving in World War II. Jackie Robinson sold TV sets. And only as recently as the 70s did baseball even pay everyone enough to let them give up those off-season jobs. Now hyper-specialized training creates baseball robots, and every swing some guys take is a home run swing. It's not because of the effort, but because of such great mechanics. I've heard it argued that it can also be a matter of pride facing a position player. No major league regular is willing to be put out by a guy that doesn't practice pitching. They have no real pitch mix, they essentially throw batting practice, they aren't expecting to be called on, etc. There's not nearly as much performance-based incentive in baseball contracts as there is in the NFL or the NBA, so I don't think it's really a stat padding issue. I get that if you're a front office official evaluating a player after the season, you're going to consider the raw stats and the eye test. A go-ahead RBI against a top closer in a tight game is way more valuable than a home run off a position player, but you wouldn't know it on paper. No one who cares at all about baseball is going to give up before the final out, so I guess that means you have to swing away at any pitch in the zone, even if it is from an infielder. For the next unwritten rule, we turn back to football. This rule has a pretty clear explanation for why it's changed. I'll give you a hypothetical, but it happens essentially every week in the NFL nowadays. A team has a third down with the ball, up by 4 to 8 points with 2 minutes or less. I realize it sounds like a hyper-specific situation, but trust me, this is more common than you would think. The 4 to 8 point cushion just means that the other team has to stop them and score a touchdown. We'll also assume that a first down will end the game, meaning that even if the other team has timeouts, they don't have enough to stop the clock completely and get the ball back. Say this team with possession has a third and medium to long at the 2-minute warning or slightly after. I argue that conventional wisdom says that you always run the ball and typically run between the tackles to make sure your running back can't accidentally go out of bounds. You gain your yard or two, the defense calls timeout if they have any, and then you punt and you need at least one more stop to win the game anyway. There wasn't any arguing against this in 1920 when they couldn't throw the ball, but teams have come up with much better ideas recently. You have to pass in this situation in today's NFL, and I think more college teams even should adopt it. A high percentage throw is a good idea, be it a screen, a slant, flat, or a spot route, etc. Teams aren't even doing that as often. They're looking to get to the sticks with medium depth routes. The risks of passing are obvious in this situation. Interception or a fumble, and you might lose the game or go to overtime. Incompletion, you stop the clock and the defense doesn't have to call timeout. Here are the reasons you do need to throw in these spots. QB completion percentage is at an all-time high. Athletic QBs give you another option to get the first on a scramble. Passing defense rules create phantom defensive penalties. You could take a sack if you need to. And if you're in opponent territory, you can even go for it on fourth down. Assuming, that is, that you gain something but not enough for a first down. The wrenches in the plan tend to come from miscommunication and blown assignments, but the analytics are so clear nowadays. This unwritten rule has definitely changed for the better. There's analysts on each and every NFL coaching staff that have to show the head coach the numbers, and I do feel that teams have gotten far better in their decision making in these kind of spots. I think Kansas City sticks out more than anybody, and all you gotta do is think back to the end of the AFC Championship as they were trying to close out the Ravens. It was a 3rd and 9 play. Mahomes lobs one over the top for Marquez Valdes-Scantling for a 33-yard completion that essentially put that away with 2 minutes left. There you go, didn't want to keep it completely hypothetical. Now, let's say your quarterback room is all beat up and you're down to a third QB in that same situation. Most of the time, I think you still have to throw and trust your guy, but you might be best off in that case throwing short of the sticks with a really high percentage throw, and then take your chance on that fourth down. I really believe today's quarterbacks are so good that more games are won on offense than they are lost. Whether or not you agree with that, hopefully you start to look for that kind of situation in the NFL and in college football next year, and you keep in mind the play calling decisions. After having recorded these, I definitely think I'm going to make Unwritten Rules a recurring segment on the show. So, now time for a recap of the teams from the NBA play-in tournament. I got a lot of these predictions wrong, and I'm largely happy about it, just because of the quality of the matchups they gave us. In the West play-in, the Lakers beat the Pelicans 110-106 to earn the 7th seed and unfortunately moved on to play Denver. The Kings embarrassed the Warriors and arguably put an end to their evil empire, then lost to the Pelicans, who even without Zion beat them 105-98 for the 8th seed. In the East, the Sixers beat the Heat by exactly 1 point, 105-104 for the 7th seed. The Heat lost Jimmy Butler in that game, and just like New Orleans, they still won with their backs up against the wall. They blew out the less talented Bulls 112-91 and got the 8th seed. They just stole a game from Boston, and that series is 1-1. I don't think many people predicted that. Philly and LA are already down 2-0, and they both lost some very winnable Game 2s. The Pelicans have no answer for Chet Holmgren and the Thunder. They're down 2-0. The Lakers could really beat almost any team in this field, but Jokic and Jamal Murray, I've just run out of superlatives for those two in the playoffs, and they have the Lakers number more than anybody else does. That one buzzer beater from Jamal Murray just might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I hate to say this, but this could be LeBron's final playoff series. Remember, this is being recorded Thursday before any of those Game 3s. So there's how every team from the play-in tournament has fared so far. This is going to do it for episode 5 of White Noise Sports. Next week, I'll break down the entire NBA playoffs to date and reset the field after the first round elimination. I think for that midweek NFL mock draft special, I'm going to try and push that out on Tuesday afternoon. If I get ahead of it enough, and if the draft went pretty close to what I expected, then maybe Monday. Still, consider yourself lucky getting the first double upload in the history of White Noise Sports. In that mock draft recap, I'll assess how I did, tell you which picks I whiffed on, whether I went with the wrong position or the wrong guy at the position, and the biggest surprises from pick 1 to 257. Finally, I feel the need to get all controversial again. I'm creating my Hall of Fame tier list of active NFL players, telling you who's a lock, who can get there with one more big year, and who's only ever going to get into the Hall of Really Good. you better be ready to argue about guys like Matt Stafford and Kirk Cousins. This has been episode 5 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
Gonna have a chance to turn 2. They got him.
Carrying track, wall, and it's gone. Throwing to the end zone, tipped, picked off.
Look, they shoot and score on the header.